things.
No pressure.
Never combed my hair, at least, or shaved it, Dave.
Okay. Sometimes I have to knock my video off because when I'm recording and doing video and several other things, sometimes my computer starts having some memory issues. I guess it gets kind of like us as people. But anyway, let's pray. Father, I do thank you so much that you are our King and our God, and thank you, Lord, just for all that you've been doing in Chuck's life, Lord, through his years at BGU, and just thank you for the work you've been leading him to do here in the last couple of years. And Father, I just pray that you'll watch over all the pieces of this Zoom room, this oral review, all the technology and the different issues that we need to keep working. Just pray that we might learn and know what it is you're doing among us. It's in your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
All right. Well, just kind of give you the format here. We will spend a little bit of time with Dave giving us, Chuck, I'll get you and Dave mixed up here.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm not doing this again.
I know. Yeah, you've been through this once before. So Chuck, yeah, we'll have you kind of do a presentation for us. I know you've got a PowerPoint ready. After he gives his presentation, we'll spend a little bit of time just asking questions, putting further, points of discussion, etc. Once we've gotten through all that, then there's actually three of us that are on his evaluation committee, Dr. Larry Peabody and Dr. Dave here and myself. And then, so we'll need to go into an evaluation session for about 15 minutes, so I have to pull everybody out of the session at that time. You can stay online, because about 15 minutes after that, I'll bring you back in. I can break people in and out of the out of the session here. It's such a great sense of power when you're the host.
Now you have coffee in that other room, don't you, Bill?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, right. You're welcome to coffee, whatever you guys would like. You have to do it virtually, of course. But
Oh yeah.
So anyway, let's give it over to you, Chuck. Why don't you go ahead and share your screen and get that PowerPoint up and running?
Okay. What should come up first is a big blue screen. Just it's a blank slide. So let's see if we can get this going correctly. I'll say, do you see a big blue screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's just to tell me I'm up. All right. So I guess all of you know who I am. If you don't, some of the students, my name is actually Charles Stevens, but I would prefer that you called me Chuck today. My dad would be Charles, and I've never been known by Charles. I do want to introduce you to my PLC representatives. Today, Sue Jane Sullivan is here with me, and she is going to stay with us during this time together. I've known Sue Jane for a long, long time. We went to church, our families went to church since we were little children at the same place. And so we went to some school together, and then truthfully over the years, as adults, kind of lost touch with each other a bit, but 2 or 3 years ago, we managed to get back in touch again.
Yes.
And so I'm very happy that she's here with us today. And so I appreciate that a lot. She's been a lot of help to me. And then the other two were Nathan Freeman. Nathan was a youth minister at the last church that I was a pastor at. Now he lives just out. In fact, he just got through moving to right outside Jacksonville, Florida, and he's the senior pastor, the teaching pastor at the River Christian Church there. And then the other person that was on my team was a fellow named Sean McClue. Sean also was a part of the congregation, the last congregation that I pastored at. And Sean now lives in Phoenix. At the time, he was a missionary in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and lived there for a long time. Now he is what they call the intercultural minister for the Central Phoenix Urban Ministry in Phoenix. And so those are the guys and gals that have helped me out, and I just wanted you to know who they were a bit, and I want to express my appreciation to them. So the title of my dissertation is up here on the screen. It's one of those long, wordy titles, but the title is The Isolation Engagement Spectrum and the Ability of Christians in America to Positively Influence the Lives of Non-Believers. This title didn't come to me until I really started writing all this in the last year, but more than 10 years ago, actually, I set out to do my doctorate and didn't finish at the time, but this subject matter was the subject that I wanted to address then. And when I came back to it a couple of years ago, it remained at the top of my list of possibilities, and it's very important to me personally. A lot of that stems from frustration at what I perceive to be the inability of Christians to, and Christian establishments for that matter, to have any real impact on people who are essentially non-believers and who don't come from the same mold as we would at all, from the same paradigm at all. And that frustration led me to look into it more. And so that's what I've been doing for like 2 years now. So the core of all of this really comes down to this. The central subject of all of this, as I've said already, is Christian, non-Christian engagement. I believe, and I think my research has proven this to be true, is that there is a growing tendency among Christians in the United States to isolate themselves from non-believing people. I think that it has always been here to some degree, but I believe that in our world today, it is becoming a stronger and stronger tendency. This work goes about identifying some of the reasons for that cocooning, and then we're going to talk about, and I'll later get to some ways in which believers can overcome that attraction of withdrawal, because it is a withdrawal and it is an attractive withdrawal. So we need to overcome that so that we can begin to engage the non-believing world, not just engage them, but in meaningful ways that have the possibility of making a difference in all of our lives. So some of the highlight topics that I covered in this paper and the research that I did had to do with this widening gulf, looking at the fact that it's not just there, but it's getting bigger by the year. Some of the reasons for that gulf, the withdrawal that results from that gulf. I spent a fair amount of time on these two terms, the term homophilia and heterophilia. And I found these actually as I was taking another class at VGU. I had never heard them, but I ran across them in Everett Rogers' book, Diffusion of Innovation. And it didn't have anything to do with Christianity, but the moment I heard those two terms, I knew that they described exactly what I was trying to display and convey to people regarding this business of Christians and non-Christians interacting with each other. Homophilia is just the automatic and very natural tendency of people to flock with and stick with people who are just like them. And then heterophilia is the opposite. It's the non-natural intention or way of going about living so that we purposely connect with people who are different than us. So in addition to all that, I wanted to go back and look at some of the historical influences that have been pressuring Christianity and molding Christian, non-Christian interaction. And there are, I think, a lot of those influences. I went back as well and looked at the biblical theological aspects of all this, Jesus' life. I looked a great deal at God's incarnational nature and how we should follow that or replicate it. I really wanted to spend more time talking about current affairs and cultural influences because I believe that we live in a world right now, and some of the things that are going on culturally, politically, and so forth are really putting the screws to the idea of Christians and non-Christians interacting with each other. And then finally, I spent some time talking and researching the need for Christians to understand non-Christians. So those are some of the topics broadly that I looked at. I did want to put this down as just the overall design of this project. The goal of this project is as simple as this. It is as simple as attempting to revive in believers a way of being in the world. Being in the world, not just thinking or believing, but being in the world like Jesus was. Luke puts it, I think, the very best. One of my favorite verses in all the scripture is Acts 10:38, that Jesus went about doing good. He just went about living and doing good and encountering people, believer, non-believer, and made such a huge difference in their life by living that way. So I wanted to talk to, at this point, a little bit about the methodology that I used in doing the research for this project. And in reality, this was not my favorite when I started. It wasn't where I really wanted to go too much, but it turned out to be absolutely at the top of my list. It was such a marvelous experience. But it was a qualitative data collection and analysis type of thing. So what I did was, there were 3 different aspects of it. The first one just had to do with questionnaires that went to individual people. I did this kind of in an odd way, but what I did was I took lots of people that I knew on Facebook from all different avenues of life. Some of them I have no connection with at all. And I invited 300 of them to participate in this. 161 of them accepted that invitation. 81 of them actually responded. And out of those 81, 25 were leaders, church or self-described church leaders. 56 were laity and self-described. And then I gave them a 13-point questionnaire, which we'll look at some of the results of in just a minute. And then having received those responses back, I then went further with it, and I, to be honest, hand-selected 24 individuals out there, as diverse as I could possibly find them to be, from all over the country, different people that I knew for different faith heritages, different races, different genders, anybody I could find. And I gave them 4 follow-up questions, which were largely asked either in person, like this, by video conference, or an email for a few of them. But there were 24 of those people. And then I also did some organizational questionnaires. There were 3 groups that I invited to participate in this, and this was actually one of the most eye-opening parts of this. In my paper, I didn't actually tell who these folks were, but I will tell you a little bit about them at this point. The whole world doesn't necessarily need to know all of this, but one of them was an Amish woman whose name I won't give you, and we'll talk about her and what she had to say later. The second one was, there's a church in Denver called A House for All Saints and Sinners. And Nadia, I lost her name now, the rest of her name. She was not, she was the founder of that group. She's not the pastor there anymore, but the fellow who is the pastor there now was the guy that I talked to about that. And then the last one was a group in Philadelphia. Shane Claiborne is the fellow that founded the group, The Simple Way. He's written a number of books, and I actually traveled to meet with him in person, and actually my son and I both spent a lot of time with him. And so that's how I went about doing that. And those organizations actually, we talked a great deal in a broad way. But in fact, what it boiled down to was that I gave them officially 17 questions. The questions were a combination of the individual questions and the individual interview follow-up questions. And so we'll get to some of that in just right now. So this was, to me, I felt like a very fascinating set of information in these first few slides. So I might spend a tiny bit more time on them. So the very first question was a very broad question. It was intended to be a baseline question, a gut level, just instinctive response from people. So everybody was just, the very first question was simply, do you believe that Christians should engage in the everyday lives of non-believers? And almost without exception, everybody's answer was yes. 100% of the people who said they were leaders said they were. One person among non-leaders said, no, you shouldn't. So it was overwhelming that these people questioned and surveyed overwhelmingly said, yes, we should be involved in their everyday life. That led me to ask a second question. And that was this: if you answered yes to the question number one, which everybody did say yes, please indicate on a scale of 1 to 10, what level of engagement do you believe is appropriate? So yes, the idea is, I believe, they believe we should engage these people, but to what degree? And again, it came out fairly high, but it wasn't, everybody didn't say a 10. I think the average of all of these was 7.1 or 7.71. So it was a pretty high instinct for them to say, yes, we should engage them, and yes, we should engage these non-believers at a pretty significant level. And then came the third question. Are there specific measures that you take in your life to ensure the maintenance of that level? So you think, yes, we should engage these people. Yes, we should engage them at a pretty high level. So what do you do to make sure that happens? Only about 70% of the leaders even said that they did anything to make sure it happened. And 64% of the laity said they did anything at all to make sure that happened. So that then led to question number 4. What percentage of your circle of influence are non-believers? The idea being here, okay, yes, we should engage them. Yes, we should engage them at a pretty high level. Many people said, yes, I do purposeful things to make sure that happens. And yet, when it all came down to it, 56% of the people overall said that less than 30% of the people that they are in the position to influence are non-believers. So the key there is that if you don't put a relationship or have a relationship with somebody that is enough in your circle to impact them, then nothing's going to happen. And so there's a fair amount of discrepancy between what people seem to want or believe to be good and right and what's actually happening in their life. I went ahead and asked some other questions that we don't want to spend quite so much time on since we're limited here, but how often do you interact with non-believers? Quite a few people interact with them as often. I think that 71% or so said that they interact with non-believers every week. How do you generally characterize your interaction with non-believers? Positive was the answer that most of them gave. And then I asked these folks a couple of more questions to see how serious they were about their faith. And so the question was, what would you consider yourself to be a person who actively goes about doing good in your life, who actively seeks to do good? And again, overwhelmingly people said yes. But again, keep in mind that less than 30% of the people in their lives actually are non-Christians and influenced. I'm going to skip over these next two because they just generally talk about what it is that to what they believe. Again, they were kind of follow-ups to the questions of do you believe that you should interact with Christians, non-Christians rather. But then once I did all of that, I gathered that information and I came up with 4 more questions and for some individuals. And these are the questions that I asked. I want you to know, what, if any, biblical text would you use to support your responses to those first two questions we talked about. Would you agree that we should interface with non-believers, and to what degree? So what biblical text would you use? That was the first question. What would that level of engagement look like in your real life if you were going to engage a non-believer? What does it look like? And then if you said yes to question 5, then what might those measures be that you're going to take? The laity, in answering these questions, one more question I asked them on what, and that is, how would you respond to this quote, which reads, "The music of the gospel is the beauty of the indwelling Christ is lived out in the everyday relationships of life." How would you respond to that? It was fascinating to ask these particular questions because what I discovered was that laity and leaders answered them very differently. Very differently. The laity folks that I questioned generally gave very broad answers. If they gave scripture in answering this, the scriptures were also very general things like, well, God said for us to love everybody, love your neighbor as yourself, that kind of scripture. Whereas the leader group was much more inclined to go about it very, what I would call more proof text, saying things like, instead of saying, go around loving your neighbor as yourself, the leaders were much more inclined to say, well, the scriptures say that we should go into all nations and baptize those in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so those were largely the responses that I got from these on these questions as I went through them. And what they more than anything else did was highlight the fact that that leaders and laity saw this business of interacting with non-Christians significantly different. So I want to talk about these organizational questionnaires and interviews a bit. The purpose was to compare, what's the difference between how an organization representative would answer these things versus an individual Christian. 3 organizations were included, as I told you. They were each selected with a preconceived notion, to be honest, of where they might fall on this scale of involvement. I perceived that, and correctly so, that the Amish lady would, and the people that she represented would fall onto a very isolationist end of the scale. I also determined that the Church of the House for All Saints and Sinners that I mentioned in Denver, Reagan Hummer is a fellow I talked to there. I figured that they would be on the opposite end, and they were. And then Shane Claiborne, he and his group were interesting because I assumed that they might fall somewhere in the middle, and they did, but not exactly as I thought they would. They are very, very, very open to non-believers, interact with them constantly, and yet there's a monastic feel about them. They have purposely moved to the what we might refer to as the slum areas of Philadelphia. It's bad enough, let me put it this way, when Cody and I wanted to get a taxi there from the airport, it took us 4 tries to get anybody to take us there. So they've purposely isolated themselves from the broader materialistic world, but very tight with non-believers. And so these guys were, again, interviewed in different ways, and with the combination of the questions that I used with the individuals. And it was again, fascinating. They were, the Amish lady, I got very little interaction with her because of the very fact that I'm not Amish made her want to isolate from me. The only reason I was able to get her name or an address, and it was all done by snail mail, was because I have a good friend living in Kansas who gave me, who opened the door for that. Is a personal friend of hers, but so it was that's how isolated she was. She wasn't even that terribly interested in talking about this subject with me. And that was eye-opening. Their whole theology basically rests upon the idea that non-believers are going to taint them, and so they are to be avoided. Shane's place in Philadelphia, Shane doesn't ask the question, he said, of whether or not somebody's a Christian. That's a moot point to him, and that's because he wants it to not be an obstacle in his discussions with people. And then the folks in Denver, they go so far as to, they believe in the universal salvation of all people at the hands of Jesus. So whether you believe in him or not, whether you are baptized or not, or anything else we might think of like that, it's, the grace is there for everybody anyway. It's just whether you appreciate it and enjoy it now. And they do things like, in order to reach people who haven't come to that point, they have church in bars. They had I believe it was an Easter service in a casino lobby, I believe, is where he said it was, things like that. So those were the interviews that I conducted, and see very broadly different kinds of outlooks on this idea of Christian, non-Christian interaction. So out of all of this, I came up with some strategies that I thought would be helpful to me and to others in making Christian, non-Christian interaction a reality, because I think in all of this research, it became clear to me that people like the idea to some degree, but at the same time they're scared and they're not doing it. And so some strategies. Overall, I came up with this idea of what I call an augmented learning community. Augmented meaning it's got multiple parts to it, and as time goes by, it may have some added to it. The idea was for this to be and we're doing this, a diverse group of 5 or 6 people, individuals. The subject matter was going to be optimal Christian, non-Christian interaction. The overarching aims of this group are, first of all, to understand the issues better, to talk about the things that I've written about and that I've studied, and hopefully I will be able to use what I've done with this dissertation to pass some of these ideas and thoughts on, and to grow from these other individuals' ideas that they can add. But we also want to be able to come up with some measurable, achievable goals and some original thinking, materials, and research. One of the things that I hope to do is take this discussion, maybe make it into, or dissertation rather, maybe make it into a book someday, but at least make it into some kind of a study guide that can be used by a number of different kinds of groups around the world that want to think about this, and maybe have some pointers for them that they might not otherwise have. We have already met twice. The first time was just to talk about the whole idea of this. The second one we shared a bit about books that we had read on this, and we talked about the handbook or the study guide a bit. And we also talked about the next item that I want to talk about, and has to do with a website that this learning community is going to put up. I've put here, this is just a snippet from the web of what it looks like, and it's titled Just Musing, Not Preaching Shalom, and the idea is not to preach at all, but rather to engage with people about this subject we're talking about, engage with people who are not Christians through all kinds of means. You can see some of the things there, stories, notes and quotes, interviews, a blog that I want to talk about in a minute. And various resources would be put out on this as well. This unfortunately has not gone as far yet as I would like it to. It's kind of just set up and in the earliest stages, and maybe when I'm released from this particular thing that I'm working on here, I'll have more time for that. But I do want to talk for just a minute about one other item that has had more work done, and that is a blog. Looks like this on Facebook. It's a blog. I actually started this myself without we've had a lot of interaction in the bigger group, but I'm the one that's handling it completely myself right now, because we just haven't got the broader community up to speed on it yet. But it's just a blog, and that's all it is. And what I do is anywhere from every week to a couple of times a month, I write a story of some kind. It can be from my life, can be from somebody else's life. Sometimes they're touching, sometimes they're silly. Sue Jane reads these things sometimes, and so she could tell you more about that. But I think I started in October, and it's got about 8,500 people that follow it now, and lots of people interact through this. And the amazing thing about it has been, this has actually been the highlight of all of this, to be flat honest with me. A lot of the people are people like Sue Jane that I know, but thousands of them are people I do not know. And then hundreds of them, oddly enough, hundreds of them are non-believers, not as we think of belief. I have people on here who are Buddhist, atheists, agnostics. I don't know of anybody yet that's a Muslim, but I'm sure there probably is. I have people who have hated the idea of God in the church. And some reason they pick up these little stories and they communicate with me all the time. A little bit of it's online for you to read, but lots and lots of it comes to me through Messenger. And I probably have 24 people that are non-believers already that we're not talking about anything that would push them away, just as a means of interconnecting with them. And I hope that we can make that to do more than that. I have enjoyed that quite a bit. So that's part of the interaction. So I do want to also talk about some of the lessons that I've learned out of all this. First of all, I have learned that the concept that Christian, non-Christian engagement, I've learned that it is above all things, it is a way of being, not an evangelism strategy. I think that has hurt Christians a lot, that everything's an evangelism strategy and it's not a relationship strategy. And so I feel like I've learned a lot about that. I think that, I know in my heart that I've learned that there's a gulf and a growing gulf between what Christians say that they want regarding Christian, non-Christian interaction and reality. Everybody is fine to interact with non-Christians, but when it comes to interacting with them in a way and at a depth that change can actually happen, then it becomes much more squeamish to them. I've learned that there's a significant difference between leaders and laity on this whole question. I've already really mentioned this, but I've learned that that there's a lot of interest in this. I received I'm not exaggerating at all, hundreds and hundreds of communications from people, Christians and non-Christians both, expressing an interest in this whole matter from one angle or the other. And interestingly enough, out of the probably 20,000 responses I've ever gotten, none have ever been negative. Not that I'm aware of, not regarding Christian, non-Christian interaction. I've learned also that the concept that, there it is, that you get this kind of response from talking to people on a relational level. I just wrote one of the blog. It says, the guy just wrote and said, I'm an atheist. This one I think came last week. I'm an atheist. However, I fully agree with everything that's been said on this post. It is all about who we are and where we come from and how we deal with other people. If you have goodness in your heart, there will be goodness. If you have badness in your heart, then there will be badness badness all about. You know, we might find reasons to talk to him in further about that, but you know, the guy's willing to listen and talk. So those are some of the lessons. Next time, I would like to have a larger study group. If I were going to do this again, I would want to include thousands instead of the several dozens that I included. I would spend a lot more face-to-face time with the people that I was unable to do that with, because the people that I spent face time with have a enormous amount to say. And I would spend more time on the whole idea of theology of work. This is, oddly enough, Larry, not a concept that I had ever really put in those terms until I did this study. But the whole theology of work blends right into this, and there should probably have been an entire chapter just on that. Sustainability regarding these different matters is going to, in large part, be a matter of caring enough to push that forward. I hope that once again, the writing portion of this that I'm doing right now and finishing up today, I hope that my ability to do sustaining work will increase there. We have done things like put a legacy person on the websites and things like that. And so hopefully we'll have the ability to continue. As for the applicability of all this, I think it's universal. There's nobody out there, a business, a school, a golf course, a neighborhood, a grocery store, Facebook, you name it. You can't name something where this is not applicable. Every Christian, no matter what their vocation is, no matter what they're called to by God, we're all called to be light to the world, to make a meaningful difference in the lives of non-Christians. And so there's lots of applicability there. And then finally, I want to talk about recommendations. One overarching recommendation at this point and in this time in history, I feel strongly about this because I don't think this is happening. And so I'm just going to very quickly state this as I wrap this up. But I think that my overarching concern is that dedicated, and hopefully my learning community can facilitate this. But my one overarching recommendation is that that there will be dedicated, committed individuals, leaders, organizations, churches, whoever, who will give serious consideration to sitting down with themselves, with other people, and with those that they lead, and answering these questions that I don't think are being answered. Number one, what, if anything, is the church's obligation to the non-churched? What, if anything, is the individual Christian's duty to the non-Christian? Does the organized church have a responsibility to protect its members from adverse influences of the world? Does the church have a need to find that balance? Does the individual Christian have an obligation to protect his or her loved ones from the force of the evil forces of the world? If so, what does that entail? What would optimal heterophilia look like in Christian, non-Christian relationships? How can the organized church help members achieve that balance? What responsibility does an individual have in finding that balance? And what do the scriptures teach regarding work? Is there a theology of work? If so, what is it? How does a proper understanding of that theology impact the way in which Christians interact with non-Christians? How can the church empower members to overcome the attraction of withdrawal instead of empowering them to withdraw? How has human history set forth fear and resistance to change as the foundation upon which isolation rests? How does our culture affect our fear level? How resistant are we to change so that that resistance to change moves us toward isolationism? How did Jesus live regarding unbelievers? What did he teach about that? Does God's incarnational nature go beyond just sending Jesus to earth? If so, what would our imitating that look like? And that's what I have for you. Thank you, guys. Are you there? I'm not there. Am I dead?
Yep. Yep.
I'm here.
There you are. I have to wake you up.
You're here.
I'm here. Okay. I'm going to get a drink right here, if you don't mind.
All right. Thanks, Chuck. Yeah. I'm having a few computer issues here, so I'm trying to, anyway, if I have some trouble, I'll have to click in and out. But anyway, thank you. Very, very helpful. What we want to do is spend some time right now kind of just talking and seeing what the Lord has been saying to us through all of this. So I'm going to just open the discussion at this point, and why don't we just jump in and ask, speak, put out ideas that we'd like to do.
Okay, you waiting for questions?
Yes, I would like to answer your questions.
Okay. Was your PLC part of your augmented learning community?
No, they were not.
Okay.
None of them were able to. These people are all physically live within proximity to me.
Yeah.
Jane lives in Texas. Nathan, my other PLC, lives in Florida. Sean could have done it. He's in Phoenix, but so no, that was, I didn't think that was a practical way to go.
What do you see as the future of this augmented learning community?
Well, I think that we will, I have this set up so that we're supposed to meet like every 3 months. We've met more often than that right now, just kind of get it started. There seems to be quite a lot of interest in it. I was a little bit surprised. I think what will take longer is getting them on the same page that I am. Not as in they disagree, but I just spent 2 years plus really about 10 thinking about this. And so in my mind, to go and meet with them one day for a couple of hours didn't quite cut getting the whole idea over to them. I did allow them to read an early draft of the dissertation just to kind of help with that concept. But they actually, it's been eye-opening just to talk with them about it. I think all but one of them, I think one is wasn't part of the question answer thing that I did. But I think that's where I'm going to have to, I guess you could say, almost back up 1/2 a notch and spend more time with them discussing the whole concept first. I was so afraid that what would happen was we would, become a study group, that it would not ever go beyond that to do anything. And while I want that to be a part of it, I don't want it to be the thing. So I kind of had hoped in a couple of sessions to get everybody to, but all that did was actually I opened my eyes some more about the whole issue. It's an intimidating, that's what I've actually kind of found, is people feel intimidated by the whole idea.
What do you anticipate? And I just ask one more question, and then I'll give opportunity for others. But what do you anticipate to be the doing then of this augmented learning community? You said you didn't want it to be just a study group, but what do you anticipate them actually doing with the outcomes of your being together?
Well, what I want to do is I want there's about 3 or 4 things right off the top, and they may have better ideas. That's part of the deal. It's not I want it to not be my group as time goes by. So if I left, died, whatever, I mean, they could continue to do this. One thing, I really think that the website has all kinds of possibilities for that. And I would like for that to become a part of what we do in a regular basis, so that we each come up, find stories that we can put on there, resources that we can find, all of that kind of thing for anybody that's even interested at all in this kind of subject matter. That's one thing. And the second one is I really want us to make put together as a group, not just me, but as a group, to build it into a study guide. So we can make a publishable study guide that churches or leaders or whoever like that can utilize to present this kind of material to other people. And then it's also personal. Part of it is, in fact, not just part of it, that's the beginning point of it that we discussed quite a bit, actually, was for me, myself, to begin to make sure I'm doing this. So we would, in fact, the second meeting, we spent actually quite a bit of time discussing that. So what are we actually doing? And that, again, was very eye-opening, because the whole premise is that this is largely serendipitous in life. And they were having a really hard time not making it programmatic in their mind, and that it went through an organization to do it. Does that make sense? It was a little bit eye-opening just to sit down. I thought I had picked people which would have, to some degree, the same starting place as I did.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Chuck, I would like to ask you if you're distinguishing between a non-believer and a non-Christian. Are those the same, interchangeable to you with concept of what you're doing, or?
Well, that's a good question. I really only intended for there to be two words used, or not two words, but two, I don't want to call them camps, but two sets of people involved. There are people who are believers in God, Christian people, believers in God, and then everybody else, okay? Not as the good guys and the bad guys, but just,
Right.
I didn't want to distinguish between all the slices and dices of that.
I understand.
I probably have, well, you have the same heritage as I do. So
Mhm.
my idea, when I grew up, the churches that I grew up in were very highly inclined to think of anybody that didn't believe like I did was a candidate for conversion.
Right.
Same denomination or not, all that kind of thing. And so I didn't want to go anywhere near that. It's just a broad categories: Christian, non-Christian. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Because I'm sure you understand the difference where I was coming from when I was reading this, that a Jewish person as opposed to an atheist,
Right.
there is a difference. One believes,
Yep.
one does not. But I understand how you're facilitating your work. Now, follow up to that is, do you ever anticipate adding a non-believer to your augmented learning community? Opening it up down the road to where they would participate, since they are the focus and you want to bring the group together?
Well, you know what? I badly wanted to do that up front. I determined at this point not to, because, and I think it turned out to be the right decision, because the learning community, or the augmented learning community itself, is struggling with this whole concept.
Yes.
And I wouldn't want that to be like that. But you know what? It's a little bit like my talking to you about what it's like to be a woman. And really, and I know that, and and it's a something I think that I need to know. I need to know what non-believers think, act, so forth, believe or don't believe from them. And that's one of the reasons why this blog thing I was talking about is very exciting, because these are the kinds of things I talk with them about.
Right, you're getting feedback from
lots
that.
of feedback about that, and it's lots of feedback, and that's that's largely what it's about. My listening to them. So yes, I hope that maybe that can happen someday.
Good, thank you.
Hey, Chuck, I have a couple questions. Really interesting research, and I got the impression that when you did your researches your research for the church leaders, the laity, I almost got the impression that they didn't really know how to respond. Like, maybe you're bringing a new topic to them that they're like, "What in the world are you talking about? Is this something that should be even on my radar?" And by reading that, I started to get the impression that those group of people are kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but reluctant to engage this. And I was getting a little discouraged until I heard your comments about the blog. And all of a sudden you have these people coming out of the woodwork from all different places. And so my question is, and I want to ask the question without being, I don't know what the right word is, but it seems churches are more reluctant. And do we need to bypass the organized church a little bit? Is the organized church a little bit reluctant to talk about these issues versus broader society and culture, from your perspective?
Oh, Dave. Oh man, you hit everything right on the head. Really, you did. It was discouraging to talk, in particular, talk to the church leaders. It was because they were. That's one of the reasons, and I probably will go back and work on this quite a bit more, because there was a huge reluctance to talk about it at all among church leaders in particular, and almost without exception. The only exceptions, and they were not complete, were people that I knew really well. And there were not very many of those that were included in this. Because I was trying not to, tip the scale somewhere by actually, picking people that I thought would understand. And so when we talked about it, they really wanted to talk about it almost exclusively organizationally, almost exclusively, and programmatically. I was just shocked. I really was. And some of these churches were leaders were from churches that I thought were, I don't know if the right word, I hate labels exactly, but I guess some people might call it more progressive in my mind, and not nearly as traditional in certain respects, but they still couldn't get off that point programmatic and needing almost everything to be run through a church. I do have a lot of sympathy for that, and maybe you do as well. But having spent 25 years as a church leader, as a profession even, and then left that, it's like night and day, the distinction in my perspective on life. I probably was like that. I tell people that all the time. I would like to tell you I wasn't, but I was. I'm sure I was. And part of that's protectionism, I think, of what is. So I'm guarding my thing. Part of it is fear. I think I promised people, and I have been, that I'm not spilling their specifics to anybody. No names, no, anything that would show who they were specifically. But I think they're afraid, partly, to be that way. And as for the part about going a different direction than the church, boy, now you're going to get me if I don't get this whole thing, because I answer this right now, I'm coming to find you. The deal is that I don't have that much faith in organized churches to do anything about this at this moment. I am pretty discouraged about that. But I am really encouraged at the laity out there who hears this. They hear this. They know what this is. They know what I'm talking about.
Could I make a comment here? And I don't mean to horn in on Dave's question here, but
please do, Larry.
What you're seeing here is the intersection of theology of work and what you're talking about.
Yes.
As churches are not interested in the theology of work.
Yes.
And I've asked just exactly the way Dave expressed it. I've said to my wife, do we need to just bypass the church?
Oh, no, I know. And see, it makes me,
I'm talking about
I'm very sad about that. I have to tell you, I'm very sad about that.
But the institution, because it's control, it's programmatic, like you say, and the theology of work movement has really existed outside the organized church for the most part. Now, there are some exceptions.
Well,
so there's a real parallel there.
I'll tell you what the example I gave to my wife. My wife and I were talking about this the other day. She works at a school district. It's the largest school district in Arizona, and she's a higher up executive in the deal, and like one level below the superintendent. And it's a big and it's a messy job, right, Suzanne? And very messy. Yeah. Schools are messy. Anyway, so we were talking about this, and I asked her. I said, so we were talking about the fear of it, the threat. That's the word I would call threat. And I said, so Tina, what if it came along one day and somebody said to you, you know what? Your job and what you do is really not, it's always been there, but it's not, it's just redundant and there's no purpose in it. It's just been there. And so we're going to let you go. All of a sudden she become very protective of what she does and not wanting to help out cut her own throat as a job. And I think there's an element of that kind of thing there. I can tell you that the way I ran the churches that I'm very good at this. Ran churches as like a business. It's the same marketing. It's the same everything about it. And I wouldn't do it that way. I probably wouldn't do it anyway. So, people ask me that all the time. No. For this very reason. But it's fear. I think it's threat. I think people don't have anything to lose, are more inclined to do that. Church leaders, just like the HOA board, if you know what that is, or if y'all have HOA boards, they keep your neighborhood clean. They're the people that have something to gain or lose out of it. And I that sounds cynical, and I don't mean it to be cynical. I'm trying to be truthful. And it's your fault, Dave, for asking the question.
Well, the follow-up to that is you are uniquely positioned because you come out of the organized, church.
Yes.
You have an opportunity, I think, to speak into it versus someone like me that I was a pastor 20 some years ago, but now I've been in business for that long. So you can be a bridge and be that voice, but at the same time, it sounds like in the blog you're tapping into a spiritual hunger that is in our culture, and you have a fresh perspective and a voice because you can be a bridge between those people who are frustrated and those who are looking for more. So my follow-up question is, and I want to put it in terms of a question, not a statement, but it seems like you have two strategies. One is, how do you, as a member of the organized, that world, that organized church, how do you approach those people to and maybe Larry could probably speak into this with Curing Spectatoritis, that great book on that. And then the other strategy is the blog. So are you looking at it as kind of a twofold strategy?
Yes.
And can they come together?
Well, you're right. That's exactly right. And there's several reasons for that. That was purposeful. One, I do think that I have some opportunity to speak directly into the church, although it's hard. It really is. It's odd how talking to a blank wall it is in a certain way. It's not exactly disinterest. I may find that, but it's not so much disinterest as it's a blank wall. It's just like, it's like I might as well be talking a foreign language, literally, sometimes. But I do want to capitalize on that because I think that's there, and I have lots of ties with that, and the bridges are not burned for that, and so I want to do what I can for that. At the same time, I have this other opportunity. It was, to be honest, kind of accidental. I didn't know that I liked to write, not since I was in high school or something, and I to be honest, how it started, actually, I'll tell you this. My son had a dog that he had for 16 years. And it lived with us, it lived with him, it moved with him to college when he got married. And then, so about 18 years old, the dog died last summer. And they had to put him to sleep. And so my son with his children and, very meaning, and for some weird reason, I walked outside, sat on my deck, and wrote a story about that and posted it. And I thought, wow, I like that. And people responded to that. And so I just started writing and then put it in a broader audience beyond. But the people who are out there to listen, I will tell you, they'll listen to this through a different way. And I hope Sue Jane can tell you this or not. I hope it's not too preachy. But the thing about it is even people, Sue Jane, and maybe you've noticed it from our little hometown that are on there, these are people that I know other things about them. I know about their politics. I know about their background. I know about lots of things. And yet they will be many times, they're the people. I went home, Sue Jane, a couple of weeks ago. I didn't get to see you, but I went home to help my mother out. And 3 people called me. 3 people called me and said, I want to talk to you.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And they were
because
people
of what
went to school with. You know who they are, and they were people. But this is what they wanted to talk about. What we're talking about today. This is what they want to talk about, and they would never. And they had exactly the same perspective you do, Dave. My church would never get this. And none of these 3 people have I seen in 40 years. So, but to put these 2 together, I think it takes kind of a both, because these people over here on the outside, of course, can have also their influence in ways. These people, I don't think any of the 3 are actual I would call a church leader as such, but they have influence there. And so I hope for, I can have him. And also that keeps me alive. It gives me the energy to do this one over here. Because this one over here would kill me. This one over here, I would just quit without this. Does that answer your question, sort of?
Oh, absolutely. And I would echo what Larry said and what was written in the chat room, that the theology of work, I think, provides a great platform to engage people. Because working Christians, they're trying to understand how does my spiritual life connect to the rest of my life, not just on Wednesdays and Sundays.
Yeah. We've always said that, life's, Christians 24/7 thing, but we don't know what that really means. And so it means, it does make me have more guilt than I used to have, though. because we have this little business. You probably had the same thing happen. You guys, I'm working. Today you got some knothead that did something, right? That they didn't do it at work. And now you have to deal with this, but you have to be a Christian in the middle of this and influence this non-believer.
Exactly.
And it's a hard road to hoe to do that. But so it makes it easier if you separate them. Yes.
Dave brought up the book Curing Sunday Spectatoritis.
Yes.
And I just had a conversation yesterday with someone who had gone into a seminary. The board, some of the high mucky mucks of the seminary were there, as well as some so-called, I don't like this word, but lay people. And he was trying to explain in a few minutes what this book, Curing Sunday Spectatoritis, was all about. He said the officials in the seminary, it was like this curtain dropped down, and they looked at him like, what are you talking about? And the so-called lay people were, it's just
that's exactly that's exactly this description. And I even ran into it that's what I was trying to say earlier about the learning community. That I was shocked to find out there was a lesser curtain, but it was still a curtain. And so that's going to be an obstacle to overcome that I had not anticipated at being to that degree.
Yeah.
So,
This is Bill. Let me ask a couple of questions, a couple of just technical questions that we have to answer just for a review, and then I'll ask you a couple others. In terms of the actual activities that you've initiated so far and that you've put into the project, we've got the augmented learning group. The website, did you say that's kind of in process, or is it actually up?
Yes, it's up. It is up. What I put on the screen a little while ago is a real thing.
We could go check those out, right?
Yes, there's not much there, is what I told you.
Right.
What I was saying, not much there, but it is up. There's a legacy person besides myself to continue it. There's a couple of things there just to kind of get get it up and running.
Right. And then is the blog up and running?
Oh yeah, the blog's been up and running for several months.
Okay, I didn't see anything about the blog in the dissertation report. Did you actually write it?
Yeah, there's a couple of comments on there, but it's just that it's on Facebook. You can see it. It's just called what's it called, Jane?
Not preaching, just musing.
Not
Okay.
preaching.
Yeah, just
Okay.
and then shalom. Yeah.
Okay.
I should know that because
We just want to make
Yes.
sure, we'll talk about this in evaluation. We just want to make sure that we get those pieces into the results chapter, in
Yes.
a good way, so that when somebody looks at this, they'd say, okay, these are the actual,
Yes.
pieces that have actually took place based on this dissertation.
So
Let
the
me ask you,
DLC, the augmented learning community is up and running. We met twice and have another one scheduled.
okay,
The website is up. You can pull it up. It's not very fleshed out, but you can see the categories and a few things. And then the
Okay.
blog has been running, and like I said, it's got like 8,500 followers.
Wow.
So it's done real well, and you
Cool.
can see that
how have you promoted the blog?
in several different ways. Early on, I actually sponsored it a little bit. Periodically, I'll put something the same way just to pick people up, but mostly what it does is it's just friends of friends and people just.
So it's been either like by word of mouth, or have you actually?
Yeah, well, after I got it going
about it,
after I got enough volume, it's kind of like a business, you can get it going and then it'll kind of self-perpetuate a little bit.
Right.
But a lot of what I do, aggravates my wife a little bit, but nonetheless, I do this. I try to respond to every person that writes me. The latest one has like 500 people responded. With a comment, I've had them with 5,000 or 6,000 comments.
Yeah.
So and I try to say something, even if it's just thank you. And that this is the business part of me that it's marketing, if you will. To be honest.
Yeah. It just seems like that is a major place. The blog, the whole social network is where people seem to feel a little safer, to talk. When you go to Facebook, you go to Twitter, people kind of just let their thoughts and feelings hang out. Then when you get face to face, right? I mean, so that seems to be a very natural place for us to engage, especially non-believers.
And it's safe for these people a lot, and they're from all over the country, over the country. And I have no idea what most of them background is at all. And the stories are never highly religious. The last one I wrote had just to do with, it was a funny little story from that I did something out of fear of a professor back in the day. I did a silly thing, and so I tell him this kind of silly story, and then I talked about what fear will cause you to do. Out of that, numerous people wrote me, about that. It was just because I try to make
very
everyday things.
Yeah.
Common everyday things that you can relate to, and a lot of it's I try to be pretty self-effacing about it. And so, and then we get the conversation going, and that it's people that I would have never been able, not only would have never run into them, but I would, and I really hate to say this, but if I were, they would not talk to me if I had pastor in front of my name.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't, and they wouldn't trust me. If you just really want to know the truth, they wouldn't trust me. And I try to even keep it down that I've ever done that in a way. It's sad, but I think that the world can be kicked in gear over this. I really am very excited about this.
Chuck, what is the URL of your blog and your website? Maybe I missed that, but
www.justmusing, not preaching, shalom.
All one word.
All one word. That's the website. But if you go into Facebook and type in under search, that's those same words, you'll pull the blog right up.
Okay.
It's easy. Or actually, you can also get to it through that website. At least you're supposed to be able to. Unless there's a link. There's a link to it.
Mm-hmm.
But like I say, most of the communication, sometimes people will talk a little bit online, but this is by itself interesting that they don't talk. I mean, they'll make a few comments, online generally, but the real comments and talk, like the ones that I put up on the screen earlier, they come through Messenger to me privately, and because they're not willing to, they're not talk about things, like most of us. But anyway, it's been fun.
Do you have any intention of having Christians on, who are part of your 8,500 there, having them interact with the non-Christians and the atheists and everything?
Yes, that, and have other people write. First of all, I'm going to have some more experiences first. But to be honest, I have some fear about that.
Mm.
Part of it's, probably I shouldn't say that. I am a controlling person, but besides that, I'm afraid. I mean, that does that say something to you? I'm afraid. I mean, probably any of you would be great, but I'm afraid for a lot of Christians to interact with non-Christians. I mean, I work hard for them not to write me and us off.
I don't think that's unreasonable at all, Chuck. I have the same experience in business. I spent a lot of time cultivating relationships with customers, vendors, employees.
Yeah.
And often I'm afraid to introduce them to certain brothers and sisters because they are offensive.
Yeah.
And they will, it sounds bad, but they'll smear the name of Christ in a way that it destroys the or it makes it harder for me then to have an authentic relationship with them, because then they want to put me in that same box.
Yeah.
So I get your fear. I agree with you.
So Larry, to answer your question, the answer is yes, I've thought about it a lot. No, I haven't done any of it because I got to figure out how to make it work because there are Christians who come on the blog. There are Christians who come on the blog and they make comments that and people overlook that. But if they interacted with that same person, it would be hard. So
what Dave said, and I totally agree with that. I mean, when I was working for the state, there were Christians that just utterly embarrassed me the way they related to non-Christians, and So maybe one of the big problems is we don't know how to love people.
Yeah.
You take your word heterophilia.
Yeah.
That it's really the word love.
Yes.
You really need to know how to love people.
Yeah.
And not to try to manipulate people or to try to coerce them. Or one time when I was working for the state, I came out. I was working in a building that had steel walls and one of those cold state buildings. And I came out one time and I knew this guy was a Christian, and because he had attended a Bible study that I had at noon. Anyway, I came out the door and here he was. He had a non-Christian pinned between the steel wall and the side of a Coke machine, and he was just ramming the gospel. I tell you, I almost wanted to just say, I don't have any part of this.
Yeah.
I'm not even in the same club.
I think the two things that I've found out about all this were that work. One is to tell your own story of your own humanity. Churches don't like to do that, and a lot of Christians are scared to do that. But everybody has a story, and I have some of these people. Again, it's more private setting that I tell my story to. I have stories that are not pretty stories at all, and some of them I've been fairly public about. But the thing is that all of a sudden they think, oh wow, that's different. If I'm one of you, you're one of me, which of course is true of all of us, but that we don't present that. And the other thing is that people, if they just mixed with these folks, they would find something out. I mean, several of you are kind of in my age range or have been. And the thing is, don't you remember when we used to crawl under the desk because Russia was going to bomb us? Although you never know, it might happen again now. But the thing is, we'll stay off that subject. But anyway, the thing is that I grew up thinking all Russians had horns under their hat, fundamentally, right? They're all these. It's an evil nation, right? But they're not. And non-Christians, some of the most loving people I know are non-Christian people. They're some of the most amazing people I know. That doesn't mean that all is hunky-dory in their life about things. But you know what? I have a lot more in common with them than that organized church you're talking about allows us to think. And so we share. That's the way I talk to everybody. If I can help it, unless I fall into my own old traps, I talk to everybody that they're teaching me as much as I'm trying to, if you want to call it that. I'm learning as much from them as they are from me. It's not I'm teaching them any, it's a mutual, we're going to go forward together thing. And I'm just, it just makes me almost want to weep when I think about some of the things that some non-Christian friends of mine have taught me about very godly things, oddly.
Mm-hmm. Chuck, do you remember the cottage meetings that our parents used to conduct?
Oh yeah, with the little slideshows and the whole thing. Yes.
Yeah, the little slides.
Yeah, that worked really well.
Basically, well, I always felt like that was very subtle condescension, that we have this, you don't, we want to sell it to you, and we want your bottom on the pew. And that was the goal, just to have that person on a pew. Yeah. You mentioned a study guide. That study guide is for your group. That is not, that is to help y'all learn how to. Yes. Right. And you're wanting to say
right now, to facilitate what we're doing right now. Yeah.
Right. So rather than sell this, you're saying we want to live our faith with you, is what you're basically saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And you know before, it's extraordinarily simple concept. That's what the concept is as simple as you could ever get. The problem is that curtain you were talking about. It's just a curtain of that just that frightens me though. But I don't know what to say about that anymore. But
no.
I was trying to think of a book. Anybody, maybe Larry, you can get me. Leslie Newbigins, who wrote, back in the 40s, I think, if I remember correctly. Maybe any, but
yes.
When I've gone back and looked at some of his books, he's got a lot of wisdom in terms of dealing with unbelievers. I mean, and he kind of pushes this concept that, when we're talking with other people, we need to come to the table as equals and have this just very high respect for one another. And then we come to that table with the idea that, okay, we are sharing from our particular perspective, my particular Christian heritage perspective. But I want to hear you from what your life perspective is. And he kind of uses that concept throughout, and he was in the World Bible Society. He was the chairman of that for a long time. And I don't know, he was ahead of his time in his thinking. But going back and just looking at some of the things that he wrote, really, I know has helped me just as I've been, in that whole engagement with people that I'm going to say, they're not Christians, but they're looking at life from a different perspective. And I have to hold that kind of respect rather than saying, I'm here to convince you of my way of thinking. That's the Holy Spirit's job. My job is to share life from my perspective.
And people listen to that.
Totally agree with that. I just finished an 11-week theology of work course, at a Sunday school class in our church, actually. And that was the word that when we came to that part of, how do you relate to unbelievers or non-Christians, that was the word that I kept finding in Scripture was respect. Yeah. And we don't know we've not been taught how to, how to respect other people who maybe don't share our exact brand or whatever. So
there's the thing that I hear over and over again is in those terms, that we make people feel less than, whatever that means to them. There's a lady who I've never met. I've never met this woman or known her, so to speak, for a year. And probably a little over a year. It came through some Facebook stuff, friends of whatever. And one day she wrote me, and this woman has one of those lives that's just like a book itself, I mean, she was molested as a child. Her first husband sold her in the bars. She was a drug addict, on and on you go. And yet this woman is one of the most spiritual people I know. She's not she is I call her a wannabe believer. She just can't get herself to do it. And primarily, though, she's fine with me to talk, but you couldn't get her in the door of a church, because of this condescension that people look at. You're going to be there, but you're second, you're a second class person, that kind of stuff. And at least that's her perception. And it doesn't matter because there's truth. I don't like the old phrase, perception is reality, but there's truth in that. And that's what she has about it. And so, we have to look at that and say, you know what? She calls, what she would call us, this group that's in there, she would call us the beautiful people. The beautiful people. Wow. I can't go to church with the beautiful people. And so she's one of the people that I've shared my life inside out with about a lot of things because I want her to know, because that was the first thing she did. It's like, oh my gosh, you've got this. And I say, no. I'm anything but a beautiful people. Let me tell you some stories about myself. And it's made all the difference in the world, but we got to be able to do that. And church leaders have a hard time doing that because of our idea of what a church leader should be. Church members have a hard time doing that because, to come to the table as an equal, because we are messed up. You probably ought to know that. The Bible says that several times, but anyway, I can talk all day long. So you guys are going to have to call this up, or I'll talk all day long about this.
I had a quick question for Sue Jane. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How did reading Chuck's book affect you or impact your life?
Well, I think we've traveled much the same path and didn't even know it. And I could say that's true of many people our age that grew up in our hometown, went to the same church and had the same experiences. It was very relatable. And I think that's the power of it, because if I related to it, I can imagine that a non-believer is going to say, this is comforting, they're vulnerable, I'm vulnerable, and I think there will be in that the energy that Chuck can take and do something with this concept. But It was hard to read parts of it because I certainly took me back to a place I really don't want to go. And it made me excited about what can be, because I've certainly thought about the things that he is choosing to research and do something about. So I was very, very honored to get to read it. I was. There were some great quotes that stood out. The one that if we don't walk in the world, and we really can't understand the cross. And I thought that was very strong, the comments he had about that, because we must do that. So, but thank you for asking that. Yeah.
You know, I just was thinking about connecting theology of work to this, Chuck. Why don't you propose? I'm joking in a sense here, but that can never happen. But why don't you propose that in order to become a pastor, after the however many years of seminary, they have to spend 5 years in the workplace, and then they can go ahead and be a pastor. See what I'm saying? I think it would transform.
You know, that I totally agree with that. I mean, I guess it's not my rule to make, but I'll make the rule and see who follows. But you know what? I tell you, you know what? How normal and sensible all this stuff is. You know this, Dave. I don't know anything about your business, but let me tell you about my business. One of the things that the guys that work for us do is termite jobs. Okay, you get termites in your house, they have to come and drill and dig and all this kind of stuff. And you know what? Before we let anybody go out and sell that, you know what we make them do? They have to work. They have to do the work for several years. They don't get to go out. Nobody. We never have hired a salesperson. So that's functionally what you're saying, though. How can you have anything to do about this? I did do some work, but not as a true adult. I mean, I did, work, in construction, what have you, in college and this and that and the other. But that's not the same as going into, being a teacher, being a construction foreman, being a business owner, and then now we're going to talk reality here. Because I think in my dissertation, I think I included this. I ended up clipping out some stuff that I really didn't want to clip out. But the thing is, I had this guy, and he's the pastor, the lead pastor of a big church here in town. He's a friend of mine. I've known him for 25 years, I guess. Good guy. But he was in my house one time, and he came over. He instigated this. He came over. He sat down beside me, and he said, "So how is your life different now that you're not a pastor anymore?" And so my first words out of my mouth, nearly, I'm not known to be diplomatic. That's my wife. But I said to him, well, now I have an idea of what real people face. And you know what he did? He stood up and walked away.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he did. Absolutely walked away. He didn't want to hear it. And he's a good guy, smart guy. But, that was kind of the response. And I thought sure someday he would come back, and he didn't. But we faced this. And I think he walked away because he knew what I meant. I think he really didn't know. And I know that I didn't know either. I look back on things that people said to me when I was doing that kind of work, and I realized, man, that was stupid. I had no idea what I was asking or saying. None. And
one of my heroes in life is Paul Stevens. And Paul Stevens left being a pastor for 7 years, went to work as a carpenter, and then finally came back, and he knew then what he was talking about. So
we need to make that rule. The other rule is, there really needs to be another rule. The other one is, and we don't even have to make this rule because it's just true, but the rule needs to be that you need to recognize it. And then you need to go out and live 5 years as a sinner. All of us have. No, I don't. I mean, literally. I mean, the thing is, you don't have to make that rule because you've already done it. See, you just need to know that you've done it. And then you can talk to people sinner to sinner. Does that make sense? You work as a worker to worker and sinner to sinner. And it makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So those are our two new rules.
I'm going to have to kind of be the guy that says we're going to have to kind of cut it off here. Going to the evaluation session. It's really been a fruitful session. A lot of concepts that have been relating to me when I left pastorate, and I could give a whole story on that too.
I'm sure you could.
And I'm sure. Got into the workforce, and then that's where the learning took place. What I'm going to do, I'm going to have to pull everybody out of the session except Dave and Larry and myself for about 15 minutes. Keep watching your screens. I'll pull you all back in a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of break you all out of the session, and then we'll do an evaluation, and then I'll bring you all back in. Okay?
Thank you.
Now? Or,
Not yet, no.
okay, let me grab something here real quick, and I'll paste it in there. Okay, all right. If there is such a word as final, but but anyway, congratulations. This has been the end of a very long, hard process. You've put a lot of work into this. And thank you, Sue Jane, for your part in this as well, and your encouragement along the way. So this has been good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate it very much.
Absolutely.
So you'll send me something? Send me the paperwork or whatever I need to.
Yeah. I'll send you some, some of the things that we talked about that maybe, and it won't be much, but just some ways to strengthen a little bit here.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Sounds perfect.
So,
Right, and I just want to add my congratulations, Chuck. Yeah, and when we did, that high pass, we just really felt that you've got some just great potential going on here. And I think, we just had a couple things to add there, especially something that really hit us is that it seems like the blog was almost an afterthought that came out of frustration, and yet that was where some of the excitement seems to be going on.
Yeah.
I'd just like to see at least a paragraph, just kind of communicating that excitement and what you see going on there.
Okay.
That's going to be really cool, really great stuff, I think.
Perfect. Well,
Yeah.
thank
and
you.
even maybe, excuse me, describing your frustration that you shared with us. You've discovered that it's safe to share that with us.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we can talk about that a little bit more.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right.
I appreciate it very much. I appreciate all your help from all of you, and you especially, Sue Jane.
Yes.
Hey, I am so proud of you. And I hope somebody will do a similar project. I think you might have inspired a grad student between bridging a gap between Christians, because right now you have Christians who don't engage each other. And I would love to see someone pursue that.
Now, there's a whole nother one.
There is. So you want to go for another one?
No, that's good for you, Sue Jane.
All right.
Well, so, Jane, I
Okay,
think maybe that should be your dissertation. Maybe you need to
Yeah,
enroll in
Jane, we'll
BGU.
get you on track. I'll get you the information.
I'm too old.
Oh, you know something? I started my DMin with BGU when I was 70. So,
Oh,
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I
You
didn't
can't
realize
be
that.
70. Oh, my.
so when people say they're too old, I always bring that up.
70. Wow.
That's amazing.
That
Very
is amazing.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is fantastic. You got a few years, Sue Jane.
What?
You have some years.
Yes, I do. I have a few, but thank y'all. This is just marvelous. I've loved participating in this.
Thank you so much.
Very,
Well, thank
very
you for
enlightening.
being part of
Thank
this.
Thank you, Dave.
okay.
Hey,
Bye.
Chuck, yeah, congratulations for me too, Chuck. This is great stuff. This is I get really excited about what you write about and what your passion is, and the spirit's moving, buddy, brother, and it's exciting.
Thank you.
I want to
Amen.
join
I'm
the blog.
excited. Been a long road.
Okay, good.
It's not over yet though, because now it's really just the beginning, because
Now
it's
you
opening
have
up some new things.
Yeah,
to
well,
me.
yeah, but that's a different thing.
Yeah,
That's right.
that's true.
Onward.
Rated on
Onward.
that.
Thank you.
All
All
right.
right. Thank you,
Okay,
guys.
well, I'm going to shut
Appreciate
down the session, and just God keep giving you direction and wisdom, and however He wants to make it happen, it's going to happen.
All righty.
Thanks
Yeah.
all.
Thanks. Send me the notes, Larry, I guess, and I'll work on it. All right?
That'll
Yeah.
be-
It
Okay.
probably is going to be till tomorrow. I'm getting
Oh,
toward
that's fine.
the afternoon here, but
No hurry.
Good.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you all. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Lord bless you all,
Bye.
Bye.
and all the visitors too.
You too. Yes.
Bye.
Bye.